Good morning and welcome to Chapter 15 of The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. This one is entitled Nest Building. After another week of rain, the high arch of blue sky appeared again, and the sun which poured down was quite hot. Though there had been no chance to see either the garden or Dickon, Mistress Mary had enjoyed herself very much. The week had not seemed so long. She had spent hours of every day with Colin in his room talking about Rajahs, or gardens, or Dickens and the cottage on the moor. Mary had read things to Colin, and sometimes he had read a little to her. When he was amused or interested, she thought he scarcely looked like an invalid at all, except that his face was so colorless and he was always on the sofa. "You are a sly young one to listen and get out of your bed to follow things like you did that night," Mrs. Medlock said once. "But there's no saying it's not been a blessing to the lot of us. He's not had a tantrum or a whining fit since you made friends. The nurse was just going to give up the case because she was so sick of him. But she says she doesn't mind staying now you've got on duty with her," laughing a little. In her talks with Colin, Mary had tried to be very cautious about the secret garden. There were certain things she wanted to find out from him, but she felt she must find them out without asking him directions. In the first place, as she began to like to be with him, she wanted to discover whether he was the kind of boy who could tell a secret to. He was not in the least like Dickon, but he was so pleased with the idea of the garden, no one knew anything about what she thought perhaps he could be trusted. But she had not known him long enough to be sure. The second thing she wanted to find out was this: if he could be trusted, if he really could, wouldn't it be possible to take him to the garden without having anyone find it out? The grand doctor had said that he must have fresh air, and Colin had said that he could not mind fresh air in the secret garden. Perhaps if he had a great deal of fresh air and knew Dickon and the robin and saw things growing, as he might not think so much about dying. Mary had seen herself in the glass sometimes when she had realized that she looked quite a different creature from the child she had seen when she arrived from India. This child looked nicer. Even Martha had seen a change. "The air from the moor has done thee good already," she had said. "That not so yellow, nor not so scrowny. Even the air doesn't slap down on the head so flat. But it's got some life to it, so it sticks out a bit." "It's like me," said Mary. "It's growing stronger and fatter. And I'm sure there's more of it." "It looks for sure," said Martha, ruffling it up a bit around her face. "That I'm not so ugly as when that were a bit of red in their cheeks." If gardens and fresh air had been good for her, then perhaps they'd be good for Colin. But then, if he hated people to look at him, perhaps he would not like to see Dickon. "Why does it make you angry when you are looked at?" she inquired one day. "I always hated it," he answered, "even when I was very little. When they took me to the seaside and I used to lie in my carriage, everybody used to stare and ladies would stop and talk to my nurses, and then they would begin to whisper, and I knew they were saying that I shouldn't live to grow up. Then sometimes the ladies would pat my cheeks and say, 'Poor child.' Once a lady did that. I screamed out loud and bit her hand. She was so frightened she ran away." "She thought you had gone like a mad dog," said Mary, not at all admiringly. "I don't care what she thought," said Colin, frowning. "I wonder why you didn't scream and bite me when I came into your room," said Mary. Then she began to smile slowly. "I thought you were a ghost or a dream," he said. "You can't bite a ghost or a dream, and if you scream, they don't care." "Would you hate it if a boy looked at you?" Mary asked uncertainly. He lay back on his cushion and paused thoughtfully. "There's one boy," he said quite slowly, as if he were thinking it over, every word. "There's one boy I believe I shouldn't mind. That is the boy who knows where the foxes live. Dickon." "I'm sure you wouldn't mind him," said Mary. The The birds and don't, and other animals, he said, still thinking it over. Perhaps that's why I shouldn't. He's a sort of an animal character, and I am a boy animal. Then she laughed, and he laughed too. In fact, it ended in their both laughing a great deal and finding the idea of a boy hiding in his hole very funny indeed. What Mary felt afterwards was that she need not fear about Dickon. On that first morning when the sky was blue again, Mary wakened very early. The sun was pouring in slanting rays through the blinds, and there was something joyous in the sight of it that she jumped out of bed and ran to the window. She threw up the blinds and opened the window itself, and a great waft of fresh, scented air blew in on her. The moor was blue, and the whole world looked as if something magic had happened to it. There were tender little fluting sounds here and there, and everywhere, as if scores of birds were beginning to tune up for a concert. Mary put her hand out of the window and held it up to the sun. "It's warm, warm," she said. "It will make the pale green points push up, and it will make the bulbs and roots work and struggle with all their might under the earth." She knelt down and leaned out of the window as far as she could, breathing big breaths and sniffing the air until she laughed because she remembered what Dickon's mother had said about the end of his nose quivering like a rabbit's. "It must be very early," she said. "The little clouds are all pink, and I've never seen the sky look like this. No one is up. I don't even hear the stable boys." A sudden thought made her scramble to her feet. "I can't wait. I'm going to see the garden." She had learned to dress herself by this time, and she put her clothes on in 5 minutes. She knew a small side door which she could unbolt herself, and she flew downstairs in her stocking feet and put her shoes on in the hall. She chained and unbolted and unlocked the door, and when it was open, she sprang across the step and with one bound, and there she was standing on the grass, which seemed to have turned green, and with the sun pouring down on her, the warm, sweet wafts about her, and the fluting and the twittering, singing coming up from every bush and tree. She grasped her hands for pure joy and looked up at the sky. It was so blue and pink and pearly white and flooded with springtime light that she felt that she must flute and sing aloud herself, and she knew that thrushes and robins and skylarks could not possibly help it. She ran around the shrubs and the paths around the secret garden. "It's different already," she said. "The grass is greener, the things are sticking up everywhere, and things are uncurling, and green buds of leaves are showing. This afternoon I'm sure Dickon will come." The long, warm rain had done strange things to the herbaceous beds which bordered the walks on the lower wall. There were things sprouting, pushing out from the roots of clumps of plants, and there were actually here and there glimpses of royal and purple and yellow unfurling among the stems of crocuses. 6 months before, Mistress Mary would have wakened, but now she missed nothing. 6 months before, Mistress Mary would not have seen the world and how it was waking up, but now she missed nothing. When she had reached the place where the door hid itself under the ivy, she was startled by a curious loud sound. It was the caw, caw of a crow, and it came from the top of the wall. When she looked up, there sat a very big, glossy, plumaged, blue-black bird, looking down at her very wisely indeed. She had never seen a crow so close before, and it made her a little nervous. But the next moment he spread his wings and flapped away across the garden. She hoped he was not going to stay inside, and she pushed the door open, wondering if he would. When she got fairly into the garden, she saw that he probably did intend to stay, because he had alighted on a dwarf apple tree, and under the apple tree a little reddish animal with a bushy tail, and both of them were watching the stooping body and rust-red head of Dickon, who was kneeling on the grass, working hard. Mary flew across the grass to him. "Oh, Dickon, Dickon," she cried out. "How could you get here so early? How could you? The sun has only just come up." He got up himself, laughing and glowing, and tousled his eyes like a bit of the sky. "Aye," he said,
I was up long before him. How could I have stayed abed? The world's all fair begun again this morning, it has, and it's working and umming and scratching and hipping and nest building and breathing and all out sense till you got to be out of stead or lying on your back.
When the sun did jump up, the moor went mad for joy. He said, sorry, I had to stop. I have something in my throat, so I'm coughing a little bit. So here is Dickon talking. Well, the sun did jump up the moor, went mad for joy, and I was in the midst of the heather, and I run like mad myself, shouting and singing, and I come straight here. I couldn't have stayed away. Why, the garden was lying here waiting. Mary put her hands on her chest, panting as if she had been running herself. Oh, Dickon, she said, I'm so happy I can scarcely breathe. Seeing him talking to a stranger, the little bushy-tailed animal rose from its place under the tree and came to him. The rook, crawling once, flew down from its branch to settle quietly on his shoulder.
This is the little fox cub, he said,
rubbing the little reddish animal's head.
It's named Captain. And this here's Suit. Suit flew across the moor with me, and Captain, he run the same as if the hounds had been after him. They both felt as if I did.
Neither of the creatures looked as if they were the least afraid of Mary. When Dickon began to walk about, Suit stayed on his shoulder, and Captain trotted quietly close to his side.
So yeah, said Dickon. See how they's pushed up in these and these here?
He threw himself on his knee, and Mary went down beside him. They had come upon a clump of crocus burst into purple and orange and gold. Mary bent her face down and kissed them. You never kiss a person in that way, she said when she lifted her head. Flowers are so different. He looked puzzled but smiled. Excuse me, gotta get a drink.
He said, I'll kiss my mother many times that way. When I come in from the moor after a day of running, and she stood there at the door in the sun looked at us so glad and so comfortable.
They ran from one part of the garden to the other and found so many wonders that they were obliged to remind themselves that they must whisper or speak low. He showed her swelling leaf buds on rose branches which had seemed dead. He showed her 10,000 new green points pushing through the mold. When with their eager young noses close to the ground, they sniffed its warm springtime breathing. They dug and pulled and laughed low with rapture until Mistress Mary's hair was as tumbled as Dickon's, and her cheeks were almost as poppy red as his. There was every joy on earth in the secret garden that morning, and in the midst of them came a delight more delightful than all, because it was more wonderful. Swiftly, something flew across the wall and darted through the trees to a close-grown corner, and a little flare of red-breasted bird with something hanging from its beak. Dickon stood quite still, put his hand on Mary almost as if they had suddenly found themselves laughing in a church.
We mustn't stir, he whispered in broad Yorkshire. We mustn't scare breath. I know he was mate hunting. I see him last week. It's Ben Weatherstaff's robber. He's building his nest. He'll stay here if he don't see us. And we don't flight him.
They settled down softly on the grass and sat there without moving.
Us mustn't seem as if we was watching him too close, said Dickon. He'd be out with us for good if he got a notion we was interfering now. It'll be a good bit different till this is all over. He's setting up his housekeeping. He'll be shyer and readier to take things ill. He's got no time for visiting and gossiping. Us must be still a bit and try to look as if the grass and trees and bushes is what we're looking at. Then we's got used to us seeing us. I'll chirp a bit and he'll know us not be in his way.
Mistress Mary was not at all sure that she knew, as Dickens seemed to, how to try to look like grass and trees and bushes. But he had said the queer thing as if it was the simplest and most natural thing in the world, and she felt it must be quite easy for him to do. And indeed, she watched him for a few minutes carefully, wondering if it was possible for him to quietly turn green and pull out branches and leaves. He only sat wonderfully still, and when he spoke, dropped his voice to such softness that it was curious that she could hear him, but she could. "It's springtime, this nest building is," he said. "Our war is going to be that way same every year since the world begun. They've got a way of thinking and doing things and a body that are not metal. You can lose a friend in springtime easier than any season if you're too curious." "If we talk about him, I can't help looking at him," Mary said softly as possible. "We must talk of something else. There is something I want to tell you."
"You'll like it better if us talk something else," said Dickon. "What is it thou got to tell me?"
"Well, do you know about Colin?" she whispered. He turned his head to look at her.
"What do thou know about him?" he asked.
"Well, I've seen him. I've talked to him every day this week. He wants me to come. He says I'm making him forget all about being ill and dying," answered Mary. Dickon looked actually relieved as soon as the surprise died away from his face.
"Glad of that," he exclaimed. "I'm right down glad. It makes me easier. I know I mustn't say things about him. I don't like having to hide things."
"Don't you like hiding the garden?" said Mary.
"Oh, I'll never tell about it," he answered. "But I says to Mother, 'Mother,' I says, 'I got to keep a secret to keep. It's not a bad one. That knows that. It's no worse than hiding where the bird nest is, if that doesn't mind it, does that?'"
Mary always wanted to hear about Mother. "What did she say?" she asked, not afraid at all to hear. Dickon grinned sweet-temperedly.
"It was just like her, what she said," he answered. "She gave my head a bit of rub and laughed and said, 'Hey, lad, thou can have all the secrets thou likes. I've known thee 12 years.
"How did you know about Colin?" asked Mary.
Everybody know about Master Colin. Know that he was a little lad. It was like to be crippled, as they know Master Craven didn't like him to be plucked out. Folks is sorry for Master Craven, because Mrs. Craven's such a pretty young lady, and they were so fond of each other. Mrs. Medlock stops in our cottage whenever she goes to Thwaite, and she doesn't mind talking to Mother about before us children, because she knows us has been brought up to be trusty." How did thou find out about him?" "Martha was in fine trouble last time she came home. She said she had heard him fretting, and that was asking, and she didn't know what to say."
Mary told him her story about the midnight wuthering of the wind which had awakened her, and about the far-off sound, faint, of the complaining voice, which had led her down the dark corridor with her candle, and had ended her with opening the door of the dimly lighted room with the carven four-poster bed in the corner. When she described the small ivory-white face and the strange black-rimmed eyes, Dickon shook his head. "It was just like his mother's eyes, only hers was always laughing, they say," he said. "I say Mr. Craven can't bear to see him when he's awake, and because his face is so like his mother and yet looks so different in this miserable bit of face." "Do you think he wants to die?" whispered Mary.
"No, but he wishes he'd never been born. Mother says that's the worst thing on earth for a child. Them as not want scarce ever thrives. Master Craven, he bought anything he could for that poor lad, but he liked to forget he's on earth. For one thing, he's afraid he'll look at it once some day and find he's grown a hunchback."
"Colin's so afraid of it himself he won't sit up," said Mary. "He's always thinking that he should feel a lump coming and he should go crazy and scream himself to death."
"He oughtn't to lie there thinking like that," said Dickon. "No lad can get well as them thoughts going through his head."
The fox was lying on the grass close by him, looking up to ask for a pat now and then, and Dickon bent down and rubbed his neck softly and thought a few minutes in silence. Presently he lifted his head and looked round the garden.
At first we got there, he said, it seemed like everything was grey. Look around now and tell me if thou doesn't see difference.
Mary looked and caught her breath a little. Why, she cried, the grey wall is changing. It is as if a green mist were creeping all over it. It is almost like a green gauze veil.
Aye, said Dickon. They'll be greener and greener till the grey is all gone. Can thou guess what I was thinking?
I know it was something nice, said Mary eagerly. I believe it was something about Colin.
I was thinking that if he was out there, it wouldn't be watching for lumps growing on his back. He'd be watching for buds to break or the rose bushes. Or he'd be likely healthier, explained Dickon. I was wondering if we couldn't ever get him in humour to come out here and lie under the trees in his carriage.
I've been wondering that myself. I've thought about it every time I've talked to him, said Mary. I've wondered if he could keep a secret, and I wondered if we could bring him here without anyone seeing us. I thought perhaps you could push a carriage. The doctor said he must have fresh air if he wants us to take him out. Excuse me. The doctor said he must have fresh air, and if he wants us to take him out, nobody dare disobey him. He wouldn't go out for other people, and perhaps they will be glad if he will let us go out with him. He could order the gardeners to keep away so they wouldn't find out. Dickon was thinking very hard as he scratched Captain's back. It'll be good for him. I warrant that, he said. Us not be thinking that he'd never been born. Us just be two children watching a garden grow, and he'd be another. Two lads and a lass, just looking at a springtime. I warrant be better than doctor's stuff. He's lying in his room so long, and he's always been so afraid his back that it has made him queer, said Mary. He knows a good many things out of books, but he doesn't know anything else. He says he has been too ill to notice things, and he hates going out of doors, and he hates gardens and gardeners. But he likes to hear about this garden because it's a secret. I daren't tell him much, but he said he wanted to see it.
So I have him out here for some time, sure, said Dickon. The bush is carried well enough. Notice how that robin and his mate have been working while we've been sitting here? Look at him perched on that bench there, wondering whether it'd be best to put that twig he's got in his beak.
He made one of his low whistling calls, and the robin turned his head and looked at him inquiringly, still holding his twig. Dickon spoke to him as Ben Weatherstaff did. Dickon's tone was one of friendly advice.
Whatever that puts in, he said, it'll be all right. That knew how to build that nest afore that came out of the egg. Get on thee, lad. Thou have no time to lost.
Oh, I do like to hear you talk to him, said Mary, laughingly delightedly. Ben Weatherstaff scolds him and makes fun of him and hopes as he hops about and looks as if he understood every word, and I know he likes it. And Weatherstaff says he's so conceited he would rather have stones thrown at him than be not noticed. Dickon laughed too and went on laughing.
Thou know us won't trouble thee,
he said to the robin.
Us is near being wild things ourselves. Us is nest building too, bless thee. Look out that doesn't tell on us.
And though the robin did not answer because his beak was occupied, Mary knew that when he flew away with the twig in his own corner of his garden, Mary knew that when he flew away with his twig to his own corner of the garden, the darkness of his dew-bright eye meant that he would not tell their secret for the world. And that's the end of chapter 15. See you tomorrow.